Now, it's interesting, we're talking about this subject more middle of the season, but it's a really important concept and subject. And I want to talk some strategy because people look at it like, well, how high should I hang a tree stand? And there's no right answer. And what I mean by that is it's no different than what time should you go to a stand in the morning. People say, well, you have to go in an hour before light, 45 minutes. And there's no right answer in that either. For one, just quick morning tree stand entrance. I like post daybreak stand entrance when you're going through a big open field. Don't spook the deer. Wait till the field is clear in the morning, which is 15, 20 minutes after daylight. Go right into a stand and sit down and blow your scent back into the field. Maybe you're going to a stand where your downwind is blocked. Steep cliff, big open waterway, maybe a horse pasture next door. And you can go in early and you can sit and you can blow your scent into this area knowing that you're not going to spook deer before daylight. And that's a key too. Some people go in 2 hours before daylight and then downwind of them, deer spook within that 2 hours and their entire hunt is ruined, maybe even for the day in that spot. A lot of us hunt small properties. When we go into Wisconsin this weekend, we're hunting a small property, 30 acres of cover. We have to be very careful where we sit because we don't want to blow out the property before hunting season even begins at daylight. And so I call that a just-in-time access. And that's appropriate for a lot of stands where you get there during gray light, you use cover of darkness to get in, and then you get in, get shooting light within 10, 15 minutes after right away, and then you hunt. So those are 3 times. And when it comes to tree stand heights, same thing. You know, how high is that tree stand that you're going into? Well, over the years, I can skip ahead to number 4 here. It says over the years. Maybe we can call that over the hill. But what I mean by that is I do know that back in the day, there was a time between Wisconsin, Michigan, Minnesota. This is going back 15 years at least, maybe 18. I had about 50 sets, most of them in Michigan at the time. They're all tree steps. And if I was in an open hardwood tree, 14 steps would get my little stubby legs and arms up about 24 feet. That's just the way it worked out. And then we'd use one to grab onto to get in. And what I always try to do is we're putting our tree steps 90 degrees from this tree stand or 120 degrees, meaning that it's an easy step just to get over onto the stand. I've seen tree stands where you're literally shimmying up 2 feet and getting around to the opposite side of the tree to get into a stand. It's very dangerous. You're almost hanging on and pulling yourself up. But bottom line is when you're in hardwoods, we used to be at that 24 foot of height, and even in open hardwoods, which we'll talk about in a second, I push that down to between 18 and 20, 21 at the most. But at the same time, I see that I'm enjoying myself when I get into really good cover trees, like red cedar or something. I shot my buck bow. He was a 6-year-old this year. I shot him at 11 feet off the ground, but I had tons of cover, which we'll talk about. So open hardwood. Something I wanted to point out is, think of it from a deer's perspective. Now, I'd say 50% of you hunt with some type of somewhat decent elevation change, 20, 30 feet or more. In elevation, we're hunting with 450 out here in Wisconsin, 300 here in Minnesota. Some of you hunt very flatland without much elevation change at all. That's where I grew up, hunting flatland in Michigan. Think of it from a deer's perspective. When that deer is 100 yards back, it doesn't matter if you're 18 feet off the ground or 30. In their eyes, you're on the ground. When they're looking from 100 yards away, it doesn't take much of their vision you're well within their peripheral vision to where they don't have to look up to see you at 100 yards back. You're right there. So think about it from that perspective. Now, when they get closer, obviously, there's that height advantage. You don't want to be 5 feet off the ground just saying, well, 5 is the same as 30. So I like that hardwood stand location to be in a tree that's as wide as myself or wider. Double trunk is awesome because those deer can pick you out from a long distance, but the tree is going to make that work, not necessarily the height for you. Now, once that deer is in close to bow shot, 18 feet up, 24 feet, 22 feet, I don't think there's really much of a difference. Like I said, in hardwoods, we use the family tradition ladder. It's the climbing stick. It's 20 feet, and then we're right at that point. And I'll even say I love using the ladder stands. They're a lot more comfortable, but we have to be very picky where we put those. And so I'll use a hang-on stand that's located about 19, 20 feet up in an open hardwood, and I wouldn't use a ladder stand there just because you have to walk around the front of the tree. I can't use the tree. Typically, we're climbing up the back side of the tree, and then we're going around, if you're a right-handed shooter, to the right side to step onto the tree so that we're concealed when we're actually going up the tree. Hey, we'll get right back to the video, but I want to make sure you guys know about this. Up to 40% off First Light for their Solitude and Sanctuary clothing, which is outstanding. These are the mid and late season clothing. 30% off for the Catalyst, which is more early season, and then a lot of their stuff is 20% off. So giant sale. It's their biggest of the year, Black Friday sale. Check the link into my description to make sure you take advantage of that. Now back to the video. I really like that 18-20 foot height right around there, especially if I have some other cover, but that usually means a hang on for me. Now in public land, I'll use a climber, and if I feel comfortable at 18-20, I don't mind going a little bit higher, especially if it's big open hardwoods like we go into in Pennsylvania or Ohio. I want to get off the ground a lot more. Allows me to move around a little bit more, makes noise. But when you get into great cover areas, and I'm talking red cedar, pine, conifer, maybe really good brush cover where you have a lot of tall shrubbery around you, then what you can't afford to do is get yourself out of the cover. So a lot of times you'll have great cover at 15 feet, 13 feet, and people say, wow, that's not high enough. I need to get higher. But then you go to 18 feet or 20 feet, and now you're silhouetted above that cover, either the shrubs behind you, brush in front of you, or the conifer that you're pulling yourself out of the boughs. You're getting up pretty high to where it's starting to get skinny and you just don't have a lot of cover. So like I said with bow this year, it's 11 feet high. Use a 12-foot climbing stick instead of the 20 from Family Tradition, and just didn't use two of the sections. And then I'm going up and then I'm stepping down slightly to get into the stand, because it's safer that way. That's why a lot of times when you hear me say 19 feet, that's why. We're just stepping down or straight across while we can still hold on to the top to safely get into that stand, that 90-degree angle. So in great cover, think about your downwind. Think about the deer's ability to crawl under you or get under you. And so if I have a lot of thick cover around me, we have a lot of cuttings that we put down there, we have a lot of brush, some logs. I know deer are not getting down below me. They're not getting downwind to me, or I wouldn't put the stand there in the first place. And I have great cover around me, then what's it matter if you're only 10 feet off the ground, 15 feet off the ground? I know, Dylan, I'm asking you this without knowing ahead of time, but that red cedar 2 years ago, you shot your buck out of South Dakota. How high were you there? Now you're filming, you have, you're self-filming, you have a pack up there and stuff, but were you 20 feet or were you 15 or 25?
2 years ago, I was probably, I would say, 18 feet off the ground, and it was just, it's all situational. It just required the setup. I had to be a little bit higher in order to see what I wanted to see.
That's part of it too.
Yep,
yeah.
And last year I was out there and I was more like 10 to 12 feet off the ground because I was on a steep drop-off, and, getting up that high was high enough.
Yeah, which we'll talk about here in a second, but yeah, it's not, especially when you're hunting public land, there's been times where I've been 25 feet up in a climber because we had big open hardwoods. But if you're in really thick cover, then I'd rather be lower to the ground, especially if there's nothing getting underneath me and nothing's getting on my downwind. Then you might as well be, the better shot angle for taking a shot with a bow. Again, like I talked about earlier with entering a stand in the morning, there's no set time, there's no set height, depending on where you're at. Hill country, this is interesting too, where I shot my buck in Wisconsin this year. Now, he was only about 15 yards in front of the tree, but I was up right at about 19 feet. He's there. The water hole is at 26 yards to the back of the water hole where they stand, probably in 10 feet in elevation below me. So when I'm up that high, it's a steep angled shot. I have to remind myself, I actually hit a deer in the spine and killed it that way. Had to shoot it again right away 3 years ago or 2 years ago. And you just have to force yourself to shoot down at the heart and just right above the heart in that range when you have that steep angle. So something you really have to consider. You can mess up on, you can make mistakes easy in hill country. We have to be that high because we have all open hardwoods behind us where I'm blowing my scent. So if a deer's looking up at us, there's a lot of elevation, but there's a lot of open hardwoods behind us. We don't have any canopy, we don't have any cover there that's really hiding us in. So I want to be up in that normal 19, 20 feet high. A lot of times in elevation change, like Dylan was saying, if you're shooting down at a bench below you, we have a lot of stands that are 15 or 16 feet is a stick we use. We're up 15 feet high, 14, because by the time the arrow gets down to the deer, we're already shooting 25 feet up, if that makes sense. So we're at 15 feet with the stand heights, 25 feet down there. So in that case, with that elevation change, we're right there. Now, something's interesting. I've actually shot deer uphill from my stand location. And it's the same kind of thing. If I have a lot of cover, like in a conifer, and I'm shooting uphill at a deer, then I want that full cover all the way around me because it's pretty hard to hide yourself. I'm not going to go up to 40 feet just to be 20 feet above the deer when I'm already 28 feet in elevation down below. So that's why you might have to you be 18 feet up in thick conifer. And where you run the risk there is if you're in that conifer and you go up too high, now again, you're getting yourself out of cover. I want to be where all those boughs are, especially looking down into a conifer stand, thick brush, something like that. Again, it evolves and revolves around cover. That uphill shot's not a bad shot to take when you're sitting down, you're shooting uphill. It's actually very stable. I love to shoot sitting down. That's how I shoot most of the deer. So that elevation change is pretty cool. And one thing I can note on elevation change is that a deer typically looks and observes parallel to the ground, meaning that they're not looking, it's just like if you're on a flat surface, they're looking straight ahead. They're typically not coming in and around. A lot of the baiting areas, a lot of heavily pressured areas are looking all around the trees because they're used to that. But more in just the average hunting area, even on public land where I hunt, they're not walking around looking up in trees because I'm hunting more in remote areas. But they are looking parallel to the ground. Always think about that. You know, that they're not going to be looking, yeah, they're looking down. You can get away with a lot because even if you're 15 feet up, you're thinking, well, I'm right at eye level. That's if they're looking up in the air to them. They have to look down. They're looking at their surroundings, where they're going. They're not looking up in the trees. I hope that makes sense. And then thermals. You know, something that's interesting, I've had people say, well, I get up 40 feet in a tree stand or 35 feet in a tree stand because it allows me to take advantage of the morning thermals. They're rising. I think there's a case that could be made for that, but most of the time it's pretty dangerous. And to me, you're either going to have the thermals on your side or not. Because I'm worried about, yeah, you can be up 20 feet and blow your scent over a deer that's 5 yards away, 10 yards away, and you'll blow your scent over that deer even better if you're up higher. But I'm thinking more that deer shouldn't be downwind to me either. I love hunting with some kind of blocker, a steep cliff, log jam, rocks, something deer aren't going to walk through, open field. So I'm not really worried about where I'm blowing my scent to actually need to be higher. I'm worried about that scent direction in general. Also, your thermals might be great for something that's close if you're up high, but 150 yards away, 100 yards away, your scent is still saturating the ground in the afternoon, evening. It's still spreading out there. If you're on flat ground in the morning, it's still making its way over there 100 yards, 150 yards. It's not just going to keep going up. There's no hill. It's just running parallel to the ground and eventually open up like a shotgun pattern and hit that deer that might be 100 yards away, 75 yards away, 50 yards away, certainly 40, 50 yard range. So what's the perfect height tree stand? Anywhere from 10 to 20 feet, 22 feet. I do find, like I said, as I get older, I've gone from that 24, 25 foot mark to more like 19, 20 at the most. And I've really taken advantage of a lot of setups where I have an extreme amount of cover and I can be very low to the ground. I like that shot angle better, especially in our hills out here. Even when I shot Bo is still about 3 feet in elevation below where I was at. So I'm sitting at 11. He's probably at 14 feet if you think about that. But bottom line is it really boils down to cover. Open hardwoods, I'm a little bit higher. I don't think you gain much by going much higher than that. And certainly not in safety either. Always use a lifeline, safety harness. When it comes to that, we really like our hunter safety systems, vests and lifeline. I think it's very important. And using quality stands helps. It always makes me nervous talking about tree stands because, you know, people fall every year. And I've had some close calls in the past, but these lifelines really help out. So again, the perfect height, matches the conditions, and you can't go wrong. Now, I appreciate you guys watching the YouTube channel, but I don't know if everyone knows everything that we have to offer, whether it's on whitetailhabitatsolutions.com, our website, our WHS Wildlife Blends, our seed company. Also Instagram you can check out. I'm very active on Instagram, putting strategies on there, photos of what we do every day. Much more active there than Facebook. But our seed, web classes, books, clients, articles. I have over 600 articles on whitetailhabitatsolutions.com, everything whitetail strategy. Of course, we have hats on there, and then make sure to check us out on Instagram again. But lots of stuff to offer. We're always coming out with new things, and this isn't the end of it. We have more things coming soon. Make sure to check us out.